The Mayen Sanchuan Lamborghini Huracan sat, twisted and smoking in the impound lot. Its carbon fiber body cracked like an eggshell. 24 hours earlier, it had been pristine in Marcus Rivera's driveway. Now, thanks to one vindictive HOA president who thought she owned the neighborhood, it was destroyed. But Margaret Thornfield had no idea what she'd just unleashed. The quiet software engineer she'd been bullying for months wasn't just wealthy. He was about to become her worst nightmare. In court, the morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as Marcus Rivera stepped out of his Mediterranean-style home. Coffee mug in hand, the gated community was his sanctuary: manicured lawns, imported stone driveways, and the kind of silence that money bought. His Lamborghini Huracan gleamed in the driveway like a piece of art, its blue Cepheus paint catching. The light? The car was more than transportation, it was validation. Proof that the kid from East LA who'd coded his way through community college had made it. Beautiful morning, isn't it, Mr. Rivera? Marcus turned to see his neighbor, Elena Vasquez. Tending to her rose garden, she was one of the few residents who'd welcomed him warmly when he'd moved in 8 months ago. Perfect weather for a drive, Marcus replied, walking over to the fence that separated their properties. How are the roses coming along? Elena's smile dimmed slightly. Oh, they're fine. Though I did receive another notice yesterday about the color being non-conforming. Apparently, red roses aren't approved for front yard landscaping. Marcus frowned. The HOA's rules were extensive, but this seemed excessive even for them. Red roses? That's ridiculous. Margaret Thornfield seems to think otherwise. Elena's voice carried the weight of frustration. She's been thorough in her enforcement lately, Margaret Thornfield. The name alone made Marcus's jaw tighten. The HOA president had been a constant presence since his arrival, appearing at his door with clipboard in hand, citing violations for everything from his mailbox height to the shade of his window treatments. Each encounter left him feeling like he was being dissected under a microscope. I should get going, Marcus said, glancing at his watch. Client meeting at 9. Have a good day, dear, and be careful with that beautiful car of yours. As Marcus approached his Lamborghini, he noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. Another notice, his stomach dropped as he unfolded the yellow paper. Violation notice: Willowbrook Estates HOA property. 847 Magnolia Drive violation. Unauthorized vehicle display details. Exotic luxury vehicle parked in front driveway constitutes commercial advertising and violates community aesthetic standards. Compliance required. 24 hours fine. $200 per day. Until resolved, Marcus read the notice twice, his disbelief growing with each word. Commercial advertising. He lived here. This was his car, parked in his own driveway. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Jake. Client moved meeting to 10. You good? Marcus typed back. Yeah, dealing with HOA drama. See you. At the office, he slid into the Lamborghini's leather cockpit, the engine purring to life with a satisfying growl. The notice crumpled in his hand as he backed out of the driveway. He'd deal with Margaret Thornfield later. Right now, he had a business to run. The law offices of Chen & Associates occupied the top floor of a glass tower in Century City. Marcus had been working with David Chen's firm for 3 years, developing case management software that had revolutionized how they handled client data. It was his most lucrative contract, and today's presentation could secure an expansion worth 7 figures. Marcus, this is incredible, David Chen said, leaning back in his chair as the demonstration concluded. The predictive analytics alone could save us thousands of hours. The machine learning algorithms adapt to your firm's patterns, Marcus explained, clicking through the interface. Over time, it'll identify case precedents and procedural efficiencies you might have missed. Sarah Kim, the firm's managing partner, nodded approvingly. Implementation timeline: 6 weeks for full deployment. My team can have the beta version running by next Friday. David and Sarah exchanged glances. Marcus had seen that look before. It meant yes, but they wanted to negotiate. We're impressed, Sarah said, but given the scope of this project, we'd like to discuss exclusivity arrangements. This technology could give us a significant competitive advantage. Marcus's pulse quickened. Exclusivity meant a substantial bonus, possibly doubling his fee. I'm listening. They spent the next hour hammering out details. By the time Marcus left the building, he had a preliminary agreement worth $2.3 million over 2 years. His phone rang as he reached his car. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Marcus Rivera. "Mr. Rivera, this is Dave from Premium Towing. We've got your Lamborghini here at the impound lot. You need to come down and sort this out." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "My car is at the impound lot." "Why?" "Says here it was illegally parked. HOA authorized the tow." "Look, man, between you and me, the car is in rough shape. You should get down here as soon as possible." The phone slipped from Marcus's hand, clattering on the pavement. He bent to retrieve it, his mind racing. "Rough shape? What do you mean? Rough shape? Just ... get down here, okay? We're at 8247 Industrial Boulevard." The impound lot was a wasteland of concrete and chain-link fencing, surrounded by auto repair shops and storage facilities. Marcus's hand shook as he approached the gate, where a heavy-set man in coveralls waited with a clipboard. "You, Rivera?" "Yes. Where's my car?" Dave, the tow truck driver, looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm sorry about this. The HOA lady, she was real insistent about getting it out of there fast, said it was an emergency." They walked deeper into the lot, past rows of damaged vehicles. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. When they rounded the corner, he saw it. His Lamborghini sat crumpled against a concrete barrier, the front end completely destroyed. The hood was buckled, the windshield spiderwebbed and fluid pooled. Beneath the engine, what happened? "Chain slipped during the tow," Dave said, his voice barely above a mumble. "The car rolled off the flatbed and hit the barrier. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Marcus circled the wreckage, his hands trembling. $300,000 gone. The car he'd dreamed of since he was 12 years old, destroyed because of a vindictive HOA president with a clipboard. "The insurance company's been notified," Dave continued. "Circumstances, ... double quotes, the circumstances." Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. "Well, the tow was authorized by the HOA. Your insurance might consider this a civil matter." Marcus pulled out his phone and called his insurance company. 20 minutes later, he hung up with confirmation of his worst fears. The policy wouldn't cover damages from an HOA-authorized tow. He'd need to pursue legal action against either the HOA or the towing company. As he stood in the dying afternoon light, staring at the remains of his dream car, Marcus felt something crystallize inside him. Margaret Thornfield had made a mistake. She'd assumed he was just another resident who'd roll over and accept her authority. When the lawyer answered, Marcus's voice was steady and cold. "David, it's Marcus. I need to retain your services. Someone just destroyed my car, and I'm going to take them for everything they're worth." The war had begun. Margaret Thornfield's manicured fingers drummed against her mahogany desk as she reviewed the morning's agenda. The HOA office occupied the ground floor of Willowbrook Estates clubhouse, its walls lined with community bylaws and framed photographs of pristine neighborhoods. As president for 7 years, Margaret had transformed their gated community into a showcase of suburban perfection. "The attorney's here to see you, Mrs. Thornfield." Margaret's satisfied smile faltered. "Attorney, I don't have any appointments scheduled. He says it's about the Rivera situation." From yesterday, the coffee cup clinked against its saucer as Margaret set it down. She'd been expecting from the software engineer, but not this quickly. Most residents grumbled for a few weeks before accepting her authority. Lawyers meant escalation. "Send him in." David Chen entered the office, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident expression that made Margaret's stomach tighten. She'd seen that look before from her ex-husband's divorce attorney. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'm David Chen. From Chen & Associates, I represent Marcus Rivera." Margaret straightened in her chair, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had cowed countless residents. "Mr. Chen, if this is about the vehicle violation, your client was in clear. Breach of our community standards, the towing was completely justified." David placed his briefcase on the desk and opened it with deliberate precision. "Mrs. Thornfield, let me be very clear about why I'm here. Yesterday, your unauthorized towing order resulted in the destruction of my client's $300,000 vehicle. We're prepared to pursue damages for the full replacement value, plus punitive damages for harassment and abuse of authority. Harassment, Margaret's voice rose an octave. I was enforcing community standards. Mr. Rivera's vehicle was a clear violation of our aesthetic guidelines. David pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the desk. These are the community's CC and arrest the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern Willowbrook Estates. I've had my team review every page. There is no provision prohibiting residents from parking personal vehicles in their own driveways, regardless of value or type. Margaret's confidence wavered. She grabbed the folder and flipped through pages she'd assumed she knew by heart. The aesthetic standards clearly state. The aesthetic standards address landscaping, exterior paint colors, and architectural modifications. Nothing about vehicles. David's tone was surgically precise. Your violation notice cited commercial advertising, but Mr. Rivera wasn't advertising anything. He was parking his personal vehicle at his residence. Heat crawled up Margaret's neck. The HOA board authorized the towing. This was a collective decision, was it? David pulled out his phone and played a recording. Margaret's own voice filled the office. I don't care what the other board members think. That car is an eyesore, and I want it gone. Call the towing company now. Margaret's face went pale. You can't. That's a legal recording. You can't use that in court. California is a two-party consent state for private conversations. They record all service requests for liability purposes. It's completely admissible. The room seemed to shrink around Margaret. She'd been so focused on getting rid of Marcus's car that she'd forgotten to involve the other board members. The decision had been hers alone. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Full restitution for the vehicle's replacement value, $300,000, plus $50,000 in punitive damages for the harassment. My client has endured since moving to this community. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. I don't have that kind of money. The HOA does, and if the association can't cover it, individual board members become personally liable. Given that you acted unilaterally, that liability falls primarily on you. The implications hit Margaret like a physical blow. Her house, her savings, her retirement, everything she'd worked for could be at risk. This is insane. It was just a car. A car you had no legal authority to tow. A car that was destroyed because of your actions. David closed his briefcase with a sharp click. We're prepared to file suit Monday morning. You have until close of business Friday to respond with a settlement offer. After David left, Margaret sat in stunned silence. Through her window, she could see Willowbrook Estates' perfectly manicured grounds, the community she'd spent 7 years perfecting. Now it was all at risk because of one resident's expensive car. She picked up her phone and dialed the HOA's attorney, Harold Brennan. He'd handled their legal matters for years, mostly deed restriction disputes and contractor issues. Nothing like this. Harold, it's Margaret. I need to see you immediately. We have a situation across town. Marcus stood in his garage, staring. At the empty space where his Lamborghini used to sit, the concrete still bore tire marks from the last time he'd driven it. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake. How did the meeting with Chen go? Marcus typed back, better than expected. They're filing Monday, if no settlement, by Friday. The garage door rumbled open as Alina Vasquez appeared, carrying a casserole dish. I heard about your car. I'm so sorry, Marcus. Thanks, Alina. Appreciate it. She set the dish on his workbench and looked around the empty garage. Margaret's been calling an emergency board meeting for tonight. She's telling everyone you're trying to destroy the community. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm trying to get compensation for my destroyed car. If that threatens the community, maybe the community has bigger problems. There are rumors she's going to ask for a special assessment, make all the residents pay for the legal costs. The audacity was breathtaking. Margaret destroys his car through illegal actions, and now she wanted to make the entire community pay for her mistakes. Alina, how many people are fed up with her? More than you'd think. She's been pushing everyone around for years. The Rose Garden incident with me. The Patels got cited for their cultural decorations. The Johnsons were fined for their dog being too large for the neighborhood aesthetic. Everyone's got a Margaret story. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind. What if I attended tonight's meeting? Elena's eyes widened. Are you sure that's wise? She's going to be furious. Let her be furious. I'm done being the neighborhood's punching bag. The community center was packed when Marcus arrived. Nearly every resident seemed to be in attendance, filling the folding chairs and lining the walls, holding ... And that's why we need to stand together against this frivolous lawsuit, she was saying. Mr. Rivera is trying to intimidate us into abandoning our community standards. Marcus walked down the center aisle and took a seat in the front row. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Margaret's voice caught in her throat. As I was saying, we cannot allow one resident to Mrs. Thornfield. Marcus stood, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I'd like to address the community, if I may. This is not an open forum. You're not even a board member. I'm a resident whose property was illegally destroyed because of your personal vendetta. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face flushed red. You were in violation of community standards. Marcus pulled out his phone and connected it to the room's AV system. The CC&RS appeared on the projection screen. These are our community's governing documents. Can you please point to the section that prohibits residents from parking personal vehicles in their own driveways? Margaret's mouth opened and closed without sound. The room was dead quiet. There isn't one, Marcus continued, because you made up the violation. You decided you didn't like my car, so you had it towed. When the towing company destroyed it, you cost this community $350,000 in damages. An elderly man in the back row stood up. Wait, we have to pay for Margaret's mistake. Only if she can't pay personally, Marcus replied. But given that she acted without board authorization, she's individually liable. The room erupted in angry voices. Margaret banged her gavel repeatedly, but the crowd was beyond her control. Order, order, she shouted, but residents were already standing, demanding answers. Frank Patel, whose cultural decorations had been cited, pointed an accusatory finger at Margaret. You cost us $300,000 because you don't like expensive cars. It wasn't about the car. Margaret's composure finally cracked. It was about maintaining standards, about keeping our community from becoming some flashy display for new money. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt the room's energy shift, the collective realization that their HOA president had revealed her true motivations. There it is, Marcus said quietly. Not about rules or standards, about prejudice. Margaret realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. The damage was done. A woman near the back called out, I move to remove Margaret Thornfield as HOA president, seconded, came voices from across the room. The meeting descended into chaos, with residents shouting for her resignation and demanding answers about their potential finance. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in David Chen's conference room, surrounded by bankers' boxes filled with documents. The discovery process had yielded more than either of them had expected. Margaret Thornfield's reign as HOA president was built on a foundation of corruption and abuse that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Look at this, David said, sliding a financial report across the mahogany table. Landscaping for her own property, a community relations budget that seems to consist entirely of spa treatments, and shopping trips. Marcus studied the numbers, his software engineer's mind quickly identifying the patterns. She's been skimming for years. Look at these vendor payments. Half of them go to companies that don't seem to exist. The shell companies all trace back to her husband's construction business. They've been billing the HOA for services never rendered. We're talking about embezzlement in the six figures, about $400,000 over the past 5 years. Marcus whistled low. That's more than my car was worth. David's phone buzzed. Speaking of your car, the insurance adjuster just confirmed the total loss value, $312,000. They're also recommending punitive damages given the circumstances. The conference room door opened, and David's investigator, Maria Santos, entered with a tablet in hand. I've been digging into Margaret's background, and she's got a history. She connected her tablet to the room's display screen. 3 previous HOA positions in different communities over the past 15 years. Each time she left under mysterious circumstances, complaints about harassment, financial irregularities, abuse of power. Marcus leaned forward. She's done this before. Gets into power, starts throwing her weight around, then skims from the community funds, until someone catches on or she gets pushed out. Willowbrook Estates was supposed to be her retirement score. The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind. That's why she was so aggressive about maintaining her authority. She couldn't afford to have anyone question her methods. David nodded. A resident with money and legal resources was her worst nightmare. You represented everything she couldn't control. Sarah pulled up another document. Here's where it gets interesting. She kept meticulous records, probably thinking they'd protect her legally. And now they're going to destroy her, Marcus said. Sarah highlighted entries on the screen. 90% of violation notices went to residents who weren't part of her inner circle. Minorities, young professionals, anyone who didn't fit her vision of the right kind of neighbor. The discrimination was systematic and documented. Marcus felt his anger crystallizing into something colder, more focused. Margaret hadn't just targeted him, she'd been terrorizing the entire community based on her prejudices. What's our next move? Marcus asked. David gathered the documents. We're filing an amended complaint. Fraud, embezzlement, civil rights, violations, and punitive damages. We're also recommending the district attorney's office open a criminal investigation. Maria smiled. I've already been in touch with Detective Rodriguez at the Financial Crimes Unit. They're very interested in Margaret's activities. Delivered the news. The small, cramped office was a far cry from the elegant spaces she was accustomed to, a reflection of her rapidly diminishing circumstances. They want to depose you next week, Harold said, his voice heavy with defeat. And Margaret, I have to tell you, evidence they've gathered is overwhelming. Margaret clutched her purse tighter. They can't prove anything. I was protecting the community's interests. They have your own financial records, bank statements, showing HOA funds deposited into your personal accounts. Invoices for services that were never performed. Margaret, they have everything. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. The perfect life she'd built, the house, the status, the respect was crumbling around her. What are my options? Harold removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Then you'll have to liquidate assets. The house, your investments, everything. Margaret's world tilted. The house? Harold, I can't lose the house. It's all I have left. You should have thought of that before you decided to play games with someone who could fight back. Harold's patience was wearing thin. Asset forfeiture is the least of your problems. Detective Rodriguez entered, his badge clearly visible. Mrs. Thornfield, I'm with the Financial Crimes Unit. I'd like to ask you some questions about your management of the Willowbrook Estates HOA funds. Harold stood up. My client won't be answering any questions without proper representation. That's her right, Rodriguez said calmly. But I should inform you that we've already frozen her accounts pending investigation. Mrs. Thornfield, you're looking at multiple felony charges for embezzlement and fraud. Margaret's composure finally shattered. This is all because of that car. Ma'am, this is about $400,000 in stolen community funds. Harold placed a warning hand on Margaret's shoulder, but she was beyond reason. I worked for this community. I sacrificed everything to keep it beautiful, to maintain standards, and this is how I'm repaid, by stealing from the people you were supposed to serve. Rodriguez's voice was flat. Mrs. Thornfield, I strongly suggest you cooperate with our investigation. After the detective left, Margaret slumped in her chair. The Queen of Willowbrook Estates had become just another criminal facing justice. That evening, Marcus received a call from Alina Vasquez. You need to come to the emergency board meeting, she said. Margaret's been arrested. Marcus drove to the community center, where he found chaos. Police cars were parked outside, and residents clustered in angry groups, talking in hushed, excited tones. News vans had arrived, their cameras capturing the downfall of the HOA president who'd ruled with an iron fist. Inside, the new interim president, Frank Patel, was addressing the crowd. The board has voted unanimously to cooperate fully with the investigation. We're also implementing immediate reforms to prevent this from happening again. Marcus took a seat as Frank continued. We owe Mr. Rivera an apology. His courage in fighting back has exposed corruption that's been bleeding our community dry for years. Margaret's tyranny, while he'd been focused on his own success, an elderly woman named Dorothy raised her hand. What about the money she stole? Can we get it back? Frank's expression was grim. The forensic accountants are still working through the records, but it appears Margaret spent most of it. Recovery. will depend on asset forfeiture. What about the lawsuit? Someone called out. Marcus stood up. The HOA will be held harmless. Margaret acted outside her authority, so she's personally liable. Your homes and community funds are protected. Relief rippled through the crowd. Marcus had positioned himself as not just the victim seeking justice, but the protector of the community's interests. After the meeting, Alina approached him. Thank you, Marcus. You could have just sued and walked away. Instead, you exposed the truth. She was hurting all of us, Marcus replied. I just had the resources to fight back. As Marcus walked to his car, he reflected on how much had changed. 2 weeks ago, he'd been the outsider, the target of Margaret's prejudice. Now he was the hero who'd saved the community from its corrupt leader. His phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. Margaret's attorney called. They want to discuss settlement. Full restitution plus punitive damages. She's ready to deal. Marcus smiled as he typed back, Set up the meeting. It's time to finish this. Margaret Thornfield had thought she was untouchable, protected by her position and the community's apathy. Now she was about to learn that justice, like karma, had a way of making things right. The queen was about to fall, and Marcus Rivera was there to catch her crown. The settlement conference took place in a sterile conference room at the courthouse, the kind of space where dreams went to die. Margaret Thornfield sat across from Marcus, her designer clothes replaced by a simple black dress that couldn't hide how much weight she'd lost in the past month. David Chen spread documents across the table with the precision of a surgeon. Let's be clear about what we're discussing. Full replacement value for the vehicle, $112,000. Legal fees, $75,000. Total, $587,000. Margaret's face went pale. I don't have that kind of money. You had it when you stole it from the community, Sarah Kim replied coldly. The forensic accountants have traced every dollar. $412,000 embezzled over 5 years, plus the value of services billed but never performed. Harold shuffled through his papers. My client is prepared to offer the full replacement value of the vehicle and agree to a payment. Plan for the remainder. Payment plan. David's laugh was sharp. Mrs. Thornfield, you're facing federal charges. The only reason you're not in jail right now is because you haven't been formally indicted yet. This is your one chance to avoid criminal prosecution. Marcus had remained silent, studying the woman who'd made his life hell. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her crimes. Why? He asked quietly. Margaret looked up, confusion in her eyes. Why what? Why target me specifically? You were stealing from the community for years. Why risk exposing everything over my car? Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. You don't understand. I built that community. I made it perfect. Every rule, every standard. Every decision it was all to protect what we'd created. You built it on stolen money and discrimination. I built it on standards? Margaret's voice cracked. People like you come in with your flashy cars and your new money and you think you can just change everything. You don't understand the work it takes to maintain a community. The room fell silent. Marcus saw it, clearly. Now Margaret's actions weren't about rules or aesthetics. They were about control, about maintaining a world where people like her had power over people like him. You're right, Marcus said finally. I don't understand. I don't understand how someone entrusted with a community's welfare could steal from the people she was supposed to serve. I don't understand how someone could destroy a neighbor's property out of spite. And I don't understand how you can sit here and act like you're the victim. Margaret's composure cracked completely. I am the victim. I gave my life to that community, and this is how I'm repaid. With criminal charges and lawsuits and humiliation. You repaid yourself, Sarah said sharply, to the tune of $400,000. Harold placed a restraining hand on Margaret's arm. My client is prepared to liquidate all assets to satisfy the judgment. The house, the investments, everything. David consulted his notes. The house is valued at approximately $6,000. After the mortgage, that leaves about $300,000 in equity. Combined with her retirement accounts and other assets, we're looking at full recovery. What about the criminal charges? Harold asked. That's up to the district attorney. But if Mrs. Thornfield cooperates fully and makes complete restitution to the community, we'll recommend against prosecution. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. I'll lose everything. You should have thought of that before you decided to play God with other people's lives, Marcus replied. 2 days later, Marcus stood in the empty lot where premium towing had destroyed his Lamborghini. The concrete barrier still bore scars from the impact, but the wreckage was gone. Soon, this would all be a memory. His phone buzzed with a call from Detective Rodriguez. "Mr. Rivera, I wanted to update you on the investigation. Mrs. Thornfield has agreed to cooperate fully. She's provided access to all financial records and admitted to the embezzlement scheme. What about the criminal charges? The DA's office is still deciding, but with her cooperation and the civil settlement, they're leaning toward probation and community service rather than jail time." Marcus wasn't sure how he felt about that. Part of him wanted to see Margaret behind bars, but another part recognized that she was already paying a heavy price. That evening, the new HOA board held their first official meeting. Marcus had been elected unanimously to serve as president, a role he'd never wanted but felt obligated to accept. The community needed healing, and somehow he'd become the person they trusted to lead that process. "First order of business," Frank Patel said, reading from the agenda. "Financial reforms. We're implementing a new system with independent oversight and mandatory audits." Alina Vasquez, now serving as secretary, nodded. "We're also reviewing all past violation notices and fines. Anyone who believes they were unfairly targeted can request a review." The meeting was productive, focused on rebuilding trust and implementing safeguards. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Margaret's downfall had been complete, but it felt hollow somehow. After the meeting, he walked through the community, past the perfectly manicured lawns and imported stone driveways. This was still his sanctuary, the place he'd worked so hard to afford. The caller ID showed Harold Brennan's number. "Mr. Rivera, this is Harold Brennan. I'm calling about Mrs. Thornfield. Is there a problem with the settlement?" "No, the paperwork is being finalized. But I wanted to ask you something. Margaret is being evicted from her home next week. The foreclosure is moving forward, and she has nowhere to go." Marcus felt a stab of unexpected sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure what you want me to do about it." She wanted me to ask if you'd consider allowing her to stay in the community while she transitions. There's a small rental unit available. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything she'd done, Margaret wanted to stay in the community she'd terrorized. "You can't be serious. I know how it sounds, but she's lost everything: her home, her savings, her reputation. She's 73 years old, Mr. Rivera. She has no family, no support system." Marcus ended the call without responding. Margaret Thornfield had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. He'd fought for justice, not revenge, but that didn't mean he had to enable her delusions. The next morning, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Thornfield stood on his doorstep, her former imperious presence replaced by something broken and desperate. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I wanted to apologize." In person, Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. Instead, he saw genuine remorse mixed with desperate pride. "I was wrong," Margaret continued. "About you, about your car, about everything. I let my fear and prejudice blind me to what was right. Fear of losing control, fear of change, fear of admitting that maybe the world I'd built wasn't as perfect as I thought." She looked around at the neighborhood she'd once ruled. "I told myself I was protecting the community, but I was really protecting myself." Marcus felt his anger softening despite himself. "Margaret, you embezzled $400,000. You destroyed my car out of spite. You terrorized residents for years. An apology doesn't fix that. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to make things right. How? Let me testify. Let me tell the court exactly what I did and why. Let me help you and the community recover every penny. I'll cooperate with the criminal investigation, plead guilty to whatever charges they bring. I'll do whatever it takes to undo the damage I've caused." Marcus saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before: genuine humility. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Margaret Thornfield seemed to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. "And then I'll leave. I'll move away from here and let this community heal without me. But I want to do it right. I want to make sure you and everyone else gets justice. A public confession would strengthen his case and provide closure for the community. But more importantly, it would force Margaret to confront the full extent of her actions. "There's a condition," he said finally. "Anything. You stand up at the next community meeting and tell everyone exactly what you did. No excuses, no justifications, just the truth." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do it." As she walked away, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected, not satisfaction, but a strange kind of peace. Margaret Thornfield was finally ready to face the consequences of her actions. The queen had fallen, but maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to rebuild herself as something better. The reckoning was complete, but the real test was just beginning. The community center had never been so packed. Word of Margaret Thornfield's return had spread through Willowbrook Estates like wildfire, drawing not just residents but local media, curious neighbors from adjacent communities, and even some of the vendors she'd defrauded over the years. The air crackled with anticipation and barely contained anger. Marcus sat in the front row, watching Margaret enter through the back doors. She moved slowly, her once confident stride replaced by the careful steps of someone who knew they were walking into hostile territory. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup tonight. She wore a simple gray dress and carried herself with the weight of someone who'd lost everything. Frank Patel, as interim board secretary, called the meeting to order. "Before we begin regular business, Mrs. Thornfield has requested time to address the community." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some residents leaned forward eagerly, while others crossed their arms and glared. Elena Vasquez, sitting beside Marcus, whispered, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Marcus nodded. "She needs to face what she's done, and the community needs to hear it from her." Margaret approached the podium with shaking hands. She gripped the sides for support and looked out at the sea of phases people she'd ruled over, intimidated and stolen from for years. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know most of you hate me. I know you want me gone, and you have every right to feel that way." She paused, gathering strength. "I'm here tonight to tell you the truth about what I've done. All of it." The room fell completely silent. Even the media crews stopped shuffling their equipment. "For 5 years, I embezzled money from this community. $412,000 that belonged to all of you. I used HOA funds for personal expenses, landscaping, my own property, spa treatments, shopping trips. I created fake vendors and billing schemes to funnel your money into my own accounts." Gasps echoed through the room. Some residents had suspected financial impropriety, but hearing the full scope was still shocking. Margaret's voice grew stronger, more resolute. "I told myself I deserved it. That I was working so hard to maintain this community that I was entitled to compensation beyond my salary. But that was a lie. It was theft, plain and simple." Dorothy Chen, the elderly woman who'd questioned the finances at previous meetings, stood up. "How could you steal from your own neighbors? People who trusted you?" Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "Because I stopped seeing you as neighbors. I saw you as subjects in my perfect kingdom. I convinced myself that I knew what was best for everyone, and that gave me the right to do whatever I wanted." She turned to look directly at Marcus. Mr. Rivera's car was never about community standards. It was about control, about maintaining a world where people like me had power over people like him. I destroyed his property because I couldn't stand that he wouldn't bow to my authority. The confession hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus felt the eyes of the community on him, waiting for his response. He stood slowly. "Margaret, thank you for telling the truth, but I need to ask why. Now, why not during the lawsuit, or when you were first caught?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because losing everything, my home, my savings, my reputation, made me realize what I'd really lost: my humanity, my decency, my ability to see other people as equals instead of obstacles." An angry voice from the back called out, "Pretty words, but what about our money? What about the years of harassment?" "You're right to be angry," Margaret replied. "I've liquidated everything I own. The settlement with Mr. Rivera is being finalized, and every penny I embezzled will be returned to the community. My house is being sold, my retirement accounts emptied, my investments liquidated. I'll be left with nothing, but that's what I deserve. Frank Patel consulted his notes. The forensic accountants confirmed that full restitution will be made. The community will recover every stolen dollar plus interest. It's what about criminal charges? Someone called out. Margaret straightened her shoulders. I'm pleading guilty to all charges. Embezzlement, fraud, abuse of office. I've waived my right to a trial and I'm cooperating fully with the district attorney's office. I'll accept whatever sentence the court imposes. The admission sent shockwaves through the room. This wasn't just a civil settlement. Margaret was confessing to felonies that could send her to prison. Alina stood up. Where will you go? What will you do? I don't know, Margaret admitted. I have a sister in Oregon who might let me stay with her temporarily. I'll probably have to find work, start over from nothing. But that's my burden to bear, not yours. An unexpected voice spoke from the middle of the room. I want to say something. All heads turned to see Miguel Santos, the landscaper. Maintained the community grounds for 3 years. He was one of Margaret's frequent targets, constantly cited for minor infractions, and paid below market rates for his services. Mrs. Thornfield made my life hell for 3 years, Miguel said, his accented English carrying clearly through the room. She nitpicked every flower, questioned every bill, treated me like I was trying to cheat her. But I also know what it's like to lose everything and have to start over. He looked directly at Margaret. I came to this country with nothing, had to build a life from scratch, deal with people who thought I didn't belong. I'm not saying what you did was right, wasn't, but I understand what it feels like to be desperate. The room was dead silent as Miguel continued. If you really want to make things right, don't just disappear. Stick around. Do community service. Help other people who are struggling. Use this experience to become someone better. Margaret was openly crying now. Miguel, I'm so sorry. The way I treated you was unconscionable. You did beautiful work, and I made your life miserable because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I treated people with respect, they'd realize I wasn't special, that I was just another person trying to feel important. By putting others down, the honesty was brutal and complete. Marcus watched as years of resentment and anger began to transform into something more complex. The community was witnessing genuine remorse from someone who'd caused them real harm. Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired psychologist who lived on Oak Street, stood up. Margaret, what you did was wrong. But what you're doing now, taking full responsibility, making complete restitution, accepting criminal consequences, that takes courage. Real change is possible, but only if you commit to it completely. Margaret nodded through her tears. I want to change. I want to spend whatever time I have left making amends for the damage I've caused. I know I can't undo the past, but maybe I can keep someone else from making the same mistakes. As the formal confession continued, Marcus felt an unexpected shift in his own emotions. The rage that had driven him through months of legal battles was transforming into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that sometimes justice looked different than revenge. When Margaret finished speaking, the room remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Frank called for the next item of business, and the meeting moved forward. But the community had been changed by what they'd witnessed, a complete reckoning that went beyond legal settlements or criminal charges. After the meeting, as residents filed out in small groups discussing what they'd heard, Margaret approached Marcus one final time. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For refusing to be a victim, for fighting back when I tried to crush you. If you hadn't stood up to me, I'd still be stealing from these people and telling myself I was justified. Marcus studied her face, seeing someone fundamentally different from the imperious woman who'd tried to destroy his car months ago. What happens now? Now I face the consequences and try to rebuild myself into someone worth respecting. It won't be easy, but maybe that's the point. As Margaret walked away, Marcus realized that his victory was complete not because he'd destroyed his enemy, but because he'd helped create the conditions for her transformation. Sometimes justice wasn't about punishment. It was about forcing people to confront the truth about themselves. The queen had fallen, but in falling, she'd found something she'd lost years ago, her humanity. And in witnessing that fall, the community had found something too, the power of accountability, forgiveness, and second chances. The war was over, but the real work of healing was just beginning. The metallic blue Lamborghini Huracan Evo gleamed in Marcus Rivera's driveway. identical to its predecessor, but somehow different. The insurance settlement had allowed him to replace the destroyed car, but the new one carried none of the same emotional weight. It was beautiful, fast, and expensive, but it was no longer a symbol of validation. It was just a car. Marcus adjusted his tie as he prepared for the morning commute. As the newly elected HOA president, he'd implemented reforms that had transformed Willowbrook Estates from a dictatorship into a genuine community. Monthly town halls, transparent budgeting, and an ombudsman program for resident complaints had restored trust and accountability. His phone buzzed with a text from Alina Vasquez. Board meeting at 7. Margaret's parole officer wants to discuss the community service proposal. Margaret, 6 months had passed since her confession, and she'd kept every promise. She'd pled guilty to 6 felony counts, received 2 years probation with community service, and made full restitution. The judge had been impressed by her cooperation and genuine remorse, noting that her case would serve as a model for white-collar crime accountability. Marcus drove through the gates of Willowbrook Estates, past the new memorial garden that had been built with recovered funds. The community had voted to dedicate it to second chances and new beginnings, a subtle acknowledgement that healing required forgiveness as much as justice. At the community center, the monthly board meeting was already in session. Margaret sat in the back row, wearing a volunteer uniform from the local homeless shelter where she'd been performing her court-ordered service. The transformation was remarkable. The imperious HOA president had become a quiet advocate for people society had forgotten. Frank Patel was reading the monthly financial report. All HOA accounts remain in the black. The new oversight procedures have eliminated any possibility of unauthorized expenditures. And resident satisfaction surveys show a 97% approval rating for current management. Dr. Patricia Williams raised her hand. What's the status of the community garden project? Alina consulted her notes. Groundbreaking is scheduled for next month. We've received approval for organic plots that residents can rent for personal use. Margaret has volunteered to coordinate the project. A few heads turned toward Margaret, who remained seated quietly. Her volunteer work had earned grudging respect from some residents, though others still couldn't forgive her crimes. After the formal meeting, Marcus approached Margaret. How's the shelter work going? It's humbling, she said, her voice carrying none of its former authority. Yesterday, I helped a family who'd lost their home to medical debt. A few months ago, I would have looked down on them. Now, I realize how easily any of us can lose everything. The parole officer mentioned a proposal. Margaret nodded hesitantly. The shelter needs someone with administrative experience to help reorganize their intake system. They can't afford to hire anyone, but they'd accept a long-term volunteer. I was hoping the board might consider it as an alternative to my remaining community service hours. Marcus studied her face. The request made sense. Margaret's organizational skills, honed through years of HOA management, could genuinely help people in need. But it would also mean integrating her into the community's recovery process. I'll bring it to the board, he said finally. Thank you, and Marcus. I know this might sound strange, but thank you for not letting me get away with it. Fighting back was the best thing you could have done for me. That evening, Marcus stood in his garage looking at his new Lamborghini. The space felt different. Now less like a shrine to his success, and more like a simple place to park his car. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Marcus, it's David Chen. I wanted to update you on the final settlement documents. Everything's been processed. Margaret's house sale closed yesterday, and the last of the restitution payments have been distributed. How much total recovery? $412,000 to the HOA, plus $312,000 for your vehicle, plus punitive damages and legal fees. Total recovery, just over $800,000. Margaret lost everything, but every victim has been made whole. After hanging up, Marcus reflected on the journey. The destroyed car had cost him $300,000, but it had revealed corruption worth nearly $500,000. In trying to silence one resident, Margaret had exposed her own crimes and transformed an entire community. A knock at the garage door interrupted his thoughts. Miguel Santos stood outside, holding a small potted plant. Mr. Rivera, I wanted to give you this. It's a cutting from my grandmother's rose garden in Mexico. Alina told me about the memorial garden, and I thought it might be nice to plant it there. Marcus accepted the plant, touched by the gesture. "Miguel, can I ask you something? Why did you speak up for Margaret that night, after everything she put you through?" Miguel smiled sadly. "My grandmother used to say that hurt people hurt people. Mrs. Thornfield was hurt, maybe not in ways we could see, but hurt all the same. When someone finally faces their pain and tries to change, we should support that. Not because they deserve it, but because healing serves everyone." As Miguel walked away, Marcus understood something that had been nagging at him for months. His victory hadn't been about destroying Margaret Thornfield. It had been about creating space for truth, accountability, and ultimately, transformation. The next morning, Marcus received an unexpected call from a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. "Mr. Rivera, I'm doing a follow-up story on the Willowbrook Estates case. How does it feel to have your victory become a model for HOA reform statewide?" Marcus was surprised. "I wasn't aware it had gained that much attention. The combination of financial fraud, civil rights violations, and restorative justice has made your case a teaching example in law schools. The way your community handled accountability and reconciliation is being studied as an alternative to purely punitive approaches." After the interview, Marcus realized that his personal battle had become something larger, a blueprint for how communities could address corruption while maintaining their humanity. 1 year later, the Willowbrook Estates community garden was in full bloom. Residents tended plots filled with vegetables, herbs, and flowers, working side by side regardless of their previous conflicts. Margaret knelt in the corner plot, her hands dirty from planting tomatoes alongside Elena Vasquez. "The shelter program is working well," Margaret was saying. "We've reduced processing time by 60% and improved resource allocation significantly. The families we're helping now receive comprehensive support instead of just temporary housing." Elena smiled. "You've found your calling." "I've found my penance," Margaret corrected gently. "There's a difference." Marcus walked through the garden, checking on the memorial roses that Miguel had donated. The inscription on the small plaque read, "Growth requires both roots and change." His new Lamborghini sat in the driveway, but he rarely drove it anymore. The settlement money had funded a scholarship program for underprivileged students studying computer science, more meaningful legacy than any car could provide. As he prepared to leave for a speaking engagement at UCLA Law School about community justice, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. Margaret Thornfield had tried to destroy him, but in fighting back, he'd helped her find redemption. The community she'd terrorized had become stronger and more unified. The corruption she'd hidden had been exposed and eliminated. Sometimes justice looked like punishment. Sometimes it looked like accountability. And sometimes, if everyone was willing to do the hard work, it looked like healing. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Rivera, this is Margaret. I wanted you to know that I've been accepted into a master's program in social work. I'm finally becoming the person I should have been all along. Thank you for making that possible." Marcus typed back. "Congratulations. The garden looks beautiful, by the way." He climbed into his Lamborghini, started the engine, and drove toward the university. In his rearview mirror, Willowbrook Estates looked like what it had always been meant to be, not a fortress for the privileged, but a home for neighbors who'd learned to see each other's humanity. The circle was complete. The queen had fallen, found herself, and risen again as something better. The community had learned that true strength came from accountability, not authority. Marcus had discovered that the greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies, it was helping them become allies in building something better. Sometimes the best revenge was letting people save themselves. As he drove toward his future, Marcus Rivera knew that the boy from East LA had finally made it, not because he owned an expensive car, but because he'd learned that real success meant lifting others up, even those who tried to tear him down. The war was over. The healing had begun. And in the end, everyone had won. The end.